Hello again, everyone. Now, recently we've been looking at Daniel chapters 1 and 2, and as it sometimes says on the telly, here is the story so far. Daniel and his three friends, all together now, Shadrach, Meshach and Abednego, had been kidnapped from Jerusalem and taken to Babylon, where they caught King Nebuchadnezzar's eye. He put them through a training program for his civil service and tried to turn them into good Babylonians. But by their refusal to compromise their faith and insisting on a kosher diet, God honoured them and they won the king's respect. In fact, they came out top of the class and were appointed as official wise men and advisors to the king. That meant that God had got his agents right at the top of the Babylonian civil service and political system. So, when you pray for Christians in politics and government, in fact, Paul told Timothy that you should pray for everyone in government, well, remember to pray that they might navigate political life without compromising Christian principles. And that's a notoriously difficult ability that requires Holy Spirit wisdom. But then the king had some bad dreams that kept him awake at night, and so he decided to make his advisors earn their keep, and he summoned them to explain to him what the dreams meant. However, he didn't trust them to tell him the truth, suspecting, quite rightly, that they would make something up to gain time for themselves. So he refused to tell them what the dreams were, although by now he was calling it a single dream, so it seems to have been the same dream repeated. He decided to concentrate their minds by saying that if they didn't tell him, they would be executed by being chopped up into little bits. Of course, they couldn't tell him, and even though Daniel and co hadn't been asked, they too were put under sentence of death. Daniel pleaded for time, which the king granted, and then the four friends spent the night in prayer. And God graciously revealed the dream to Daniel in a vision. Whereupon, not surprisingly, Daniel praised God. And then he said this, Daniel chapter 2, verse 20. Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He sets kings up and deposes them. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king. Does that sound a bit like a psalm to you, even though it's not in the book of Psalms? Well, that raises the question, what is a psalm? The word psalm is Greek, and it means played on a harp, so it refers to the music. However, the Hebrew word for psalms, tehillim, means praises, and so it refers to the words. Put them together, words and music, and a psalm, therefore, is a song of praise. Daniel's song starts, praise be to the name of God forever and ever. But verse 20 does say that Daniel said it or declared it, so it's probably better to call it a praise poem. Anyway, whether it's a psalm or not, what does Daniel's poem mean? Well, read the first and the last lines. Praise be to the name of God for ever and ever. You have made known to us the dream of the king. So it begins as a general song of praise, but moves on to praise for a specific answer to prayer. Can I suggest that that's a good pattern for us to adopt in our own public worship and private devotions? Start with the general, who God is and what he does, and then move on to the local, what he's done and is doing right here for you right now. Anyway, Daniel's poem is built around a study in contrast. Back in verse 4, the Babylonian astrologers tried to flatter the king by saying, "O king, live forever." In contrast, our own national anthem is a bit more realistic when it says, "Long live our noble king." We expect every reign to eventually come to an end. Daniel's anthem says that it's God alone who will be praised forever and ever. Back in verse 16 we read that Daniel had used tact to ask the king for more time, and the king granted it because he was scared and needed answers. He felt helpless. In his poem, Daniel pointed out that unlike the king, God isn't the victim of time. He's the one, the only one, who changes times and seasons to suit himself. As one of our hymns says, he is the potentate of time. And then Daniel said that God sets up kings and deposes them. King Neb would reign for 43 years, a long while, the longest of his dynasty. But when God's time for him came, he died. And then the whole crux of the matter. Back in verse 11, the Babylonian wise men had said, "What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they do not live among men." What was Daniel's answer to that? God gives wisdom to the wise, he said, and knowledge to the discerning. Young Daniel was already wiser than any of those other wise men because of his faith. So now he received even more wisdom and discernment. And while the king sat up all night, quite literally in the dark, Daniel saw a vision in the night because God is light. Daniel was far from home, and later on we see him praying towards Jerusalem to remind himself of the fact. But God proved that he does live among men, wherever they are, and that they and we can know him, provided we will call on him. So what does it all mean for us? Well, we probably won't have to discern a king's dream, but we do have to make sense of a bewildering world that's changing more and more rapidly all around us. So, desire wisdom and have faith that God will grant it to you. And then apply what you learn with tact, which means sharing that wisdom lovingly with others. And look at this. God gave Daniel wisdom and power, but in verse 23, Daniel concluded his poem by saying that he had made the dream known to us, plural. Faith, though always personal, has to be expressed corporately because we're all in it together. Let's read what happened next. Verse 24. Then Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and said to him, "Do not execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, "I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means." The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, "Are you able to tell me what I saw in my dream and interpret it?" Daniel replied, "No wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that pass through your mind as you lay on your bed are these. As you were lying there, O king, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me, not because I have greater wisdom than any other living men, but so that you, O king, may know the interpretation, and that you may understand what went through your mind." Now, I'm sure that you know that in the Bible, names are always significant. And in verse 26, we're told, "The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar." So why are we given both Daniel's names? Daniel was his original Hebrew name, but the king had wanted to turn him into a Babylonian, so he gave him the Babylonian name Belteshazzar. Belteshazzar means Baal protect the king, and Baal was one of the Babylonian gods, although all false gods are of course really the devil in disguise. Well, had Baal protected the king from his fears? Had Baal revealed the meaning of the dream? Of course not. But Daniel means God is my judge. God had heard Daniel's prayers and passed his judgment. By his grace and providence, he would reveal the meaning to Daniel, and he would then tell the king. Actually, some translators say that Belteshazzar has a secondary meaning. Secret treasure. Well, the secret of the dream was certainly a great treasure. The king had offered gifts and rewards and great honour to the one who could explain it. But once again, only God and his servant knew the answer to the secret. So Daniel did what no one else could do. But look how humble he remained. He insisted that he was no wiser than anyone else. God had revealed the dream to him, because as God himself had said centuries before, "Those who honour me, I will honour." Remember that, won't you? 1 Samuel 2:30. Honour him and he will honour you. Anyway, now we've come to the moment we've all been waiting for, the big reveal. What was the king's dream? Verse 31. "You looked, O king, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver and the gold were broken to pieces at the same time and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The winds swept them away without leaving a trace. but the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. So the king had dreamt of a statue. It was huge and impressive. In fact, it was dazzling. But it must have looked very odd because it wasn't uniform. It was made in bands, and the bands decreased in value from top to bottom. Head of pure gold, then silver, then bronze, then the legs of iron, and then the feet of iron mixed with clay, meaning that the feet were particularly vulnerable. Well, we still speak of feet of clay today, don't we? It was destroyed by a rock that struck those same feet, and it was reduced to dust and blown away completely. And what do you notice about that rock? In his description of the dream, Daniel said it was cut out, and later we'll read that he explained that it was cut out of a mountain. Not surprisingly, he emphasized that it wasn't excavated by human hands. After destroying the statue, the rock itself became a mountain that filled the whole earth. So the rock is much greater than the statue that it destroyed. Well, no wonder the king was kept awake. Didn't he see himself as a mighty ruler? Even Daniel will later call him the King of Kings. But wasn't his kingdom a fragile empire made up of many different parts, just like that statue? In the next chapter, the empire will be described as composed of peoples, nations, and men of every language. But of course, Daniel has so far revealed only what the king knew already, what he had dreamt. What he really wanted to know, of course, and so do we, is what did this strange dream mean? Verse 36. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. You, O king, are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over all of them. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will rise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. So the king had dreamt of a statue. Daniel had already told him that it's a dream predicting the future. He told the king that the head of the statue of gold meant now, that King Nebuchadnezzar himself and his mighty kingdom were being represented. And Daniel emphasized who had given him all this power, not Baal, but the God of heaven. Now, King Neb may have been the king of kings, but only on the earth, and only as far as God allowed him to be. Then Daniel said something amazing. The dream is true, and the interpretation is trustworthy. How could he say that so confidently? How could he dare to say it? Well, by faith. Just as you can only share the gospel by faith. Remember, you can never prove the gospel to anyone. If you could prove it, you and they wouldn't need faith. As to what followed, Daniel could only say that kingdom would succeed kingdom as the centuries passed. But remember that Daniel's future is our past. And so we, with a knowledge of history, can name the various empires. First, there was silver. That's the Persians. We read about them at the end of chapter 1. Daniel would still be serving in Babylon when King Cyrus came 60 years later. Then bronze. That's Alexander the Great's Greek Empire. When Daniel said it would rule over the whole earth, that was poetic license, but it did stretch all the way to the borders of India. Then iron, the mighty Roman Empire, smashing all opposition in its path. But even Rome would fall and be followed by the period of iron mixed with clay. That's the divided kingdoms of the nations that followed Rome, including us now. And it's during this time, the decline and fall of the Roman Empire and what followed, that the statue is destroyed by the rock. So, if the statue is the passing of the great empires of antiquity, then what is the rock? Well, Daniel was careful to say that it was not cut by human hands. In chapter 5, another king will see the writing on the wall not written by human hands, but by the finger of God. So it's God who will destroy the empires and replace them with something or someone else. Some say that the rock is the church, but in 1 Corinthians 10:4, Paul, now admittedly speaking about a different Bible story, nevertheless said that rock was Christ. And furthermore, didn't Jesus himself call himself a stone? The coming of Jesus would change and will change everything. So what was the king's response? How angry was he? Verse 46. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honour and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, "Surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings, and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery." Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel. That's right. The King of Kings fell before the Hebrew slave, the prophet of the King of Kings. But he wasn't worshipping Daniel. He called Daniel's God the God of gods. And instead of being executed, what happened to Daniel? He was given great responsibility in Nebuchadnezzar's empire, which reminds us that we are saved to serve. And there's that lovely little coda to the story. What was Daniel's first action? He remembered his friends, because we are saved to serve together. Oh, and what happened to all the astrologers? Nothing. They were spared because now they were irrelevant. So, the king was soundly converted. No? No. Chapter 3, verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And he instructed that the statue was to be worshipped. But that's a story we looked at last November. So we'll stop there. And until next time, bye for now.